And in that time, there's been a 50% increase in CO2. It turns out it's gone up 1.2 degrees. 1.2 degrees. That's a climate emergency? No. And polar bears. Polar bear populations are thriving.
Yeah.
Sea level is not increasing at an unusual rate. Extreme weather events the records were mostly set in the 1930s. So there's nothing going on in the real world. The whole climate scare is based on forecasts of the future, forecasts that have not worked so far, and forecasts which, if you do the physics properly, show that the increase in temperature is going to be trivial. So the whole climate scare, unfortunately, has taken over the environmental movement. You know, I did a Google search the other day to see, okay, I'll search for Earth Day and climate change. I'll search for Earth Day and air pollution and various other things. And it turns out that if you take air pollution, land pollution, ocean pollution, species at risk, and climate change came up as an association with Earth Day 80% of the time.
Yeah.
And the others were some fraction of the 20%. And the same thing with Earth Hour, the same thing with Environment Day, which is the 5th of June. Okay. And Earth Month was about the same. So climate change, which is a totally fictitious environmental cause. I mean, it makes no sense at all. As I say, it should be a public works issue. Climate change has come to dominate the environmental movement. And, you know, anybody associated with the climate scare, when it's finally revealed that people like Dr. Happer are right, and that we certainly have no climate emergency and none forecast either, even with a doubling of CO2, when the whole climate scare becomes disgraced, whoever's associated with it will be disgraced too. And that includes, by the way, nuclear power, who are using it as a great marketing tool, which I think is kind of sad because nuclear power is important, but not because of climate change.
Right.
And so the environmental movement as a whole should be very concerned about this because their favorite child, you know, their poster child will be disgraced and they will be along with it. And so, you know, the bottom line is the conservatives most of them are making a huge mistake by allying themselves with the climate scare.
Yeah. You know, when you talk about how they measure this sort of stuff, there's a reason why they call you a science denier the second you just scrape the surface of the science of the climate movement. For example, how they measure this global temperature, which, as you say, is absolutely absurd. Yeah. I watched this fascinating video, and it's as I describe it, it's going to sound boring, but it's not at all, by Michelle Sterling at Friends of Science, where she tries to explain to people why this sort of global mean temperature idea doesn't even make sense, because she showed it in the most basic way. And then as soon as she did it, I was like, yeah, of course. She put temperature, like thermometers, all around her yard. And it varied wildly all over the place based on where she had the temperature. And so she said, you know, when you go and you get the weather on your phone or your computer, it's only the temperature at that weather station at that moment, not even 5 feet away from where the weather station is. That can vary wildly. So how can they make these doomsday predictions that if you exceed whatever it is, 2 degrees Celsius
1.5 to stay alive.
Yeah, 1.5 to stay alive. Catchy little ditty, that one. But how do they even know that? How would you even think to measure that when it varies so wildly? And she said, just to get an accurate snapshot of what the average temperature is in a tiny spot like her backyard, you would need like 30 thermometers sticking way up in the air so that they aren't affected by any of the topography around them. And so how do they give me this 1.5 number? They can't. They just picked it up because it's catchy, right?
That's right. Well, it's very perceptive of Michelle to do that because, in fact, if you think about it, how do they get an average temperature for the whole world? Okay, they have almost no temperature measuring buoys in the ocean. Okay, and that's what 2/3 of 70% of the Earth. They have almost none in the high mountains. They have almost none in Antarctica or Greenland, or there are huge areas of the Earth, even in the modern temperature record, that have no temperature data. And the other point, of course, course, is that in the 1930s, let's say, most of the world had no temperature data at all.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're comparing today, which is incomplete, with, let's say, 100 years ago to talk about the temperature rise in the last century, how do you do that when you have like 90% of the Earth wasn't even covered in the early part of the 20th century?
Oh, hey, what you just saw there is a clip from my weekly full-length show, The Gunn Show. It airs on Wednesday, but this is the internet. You can watch it whenever you feel like. You just have to become a subscriber to our paywalled premium content. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com to become a member today.